I don't care if he built this company from the ground up. The old man's signature is on the documents, Leo. His heart gave out, and so did his stake. The daughter is sentimental weak. She'll crumble when we present the offer. By this time next month, Hayes and Stone will be a memory, and we'll be developing the most lucrative waterfront property on the West Coast. The voice, cold and unmistakable, slithered under the door of my father's old office. My office now, or so I'd thought for the last 6 weeks since the funeral. The words weren't just spoken. They were a surgical strike meticulously planned to eviscerate everything my father had spent his life building. I stood frozen in the hallway, a stack of architectural renderings for the new community center, heavy in my arms. The familiar scent of sawdust and old coffee that always clung to the Hayes and Stone headquarters suddenly smelled like decay, like betrayal. The voice belonged to Marcus Thorne, my father's business partner of 20 years. The man who had bounced me on his knee, who had given a tearful eulogy, calling Dad his brother in all but blood. And Leo. That was Leo Walsh, our head of finance. The man my father trusted with the books and with our family. My heart wasn't just beating. It was a frantic drum against my ribs, a trapped bird trying to escape a collapsing cage. Weak, sentimental. I felt the words like physical blows. They weren't entirely wrong. The grief had been a tidal wave, and I was still gasping for air, trying to find my footing as the new, unprepared CEO of a legacy I never asked for. My name is Alara Hayes. For 30 years, I defined myself by my own blueprint, a successful architect in New York, a life of clean lines, glass towers, and professional detachment 3,000 miles away from this small, rain-slicked Washington town. My father, Arthur Hayes, was the town's heart. His construction company, Hayes and Stone, didn't just build houses, it built communities. He was a man of handshake deals and unwavering integrity. The stone in Hayes and Stone was Marcus Thorne. A clever corporate-sounding name he'd insisted on my father had once told me with a sigh. I never understood that sigh until now. The accident, a sudden massive heart attack while he was inspecting the pilings for the new pier, had shattered my world. I'd come home to Cascade Cove to bury my father, and I thought to sell the company, to tie up the last loose end of my childhood and return to my own life. But going through his things, I found the company was in trouble. Debts I never knew about, projects running over budget, and my father's final, unfinished passion project, the Cascade Cove Community Center, a beautiful, sprawling complex meant to give the town a heart. He'd poured his own money into it, mortgaged the company to see it built. It was his dream. And Marcus Thorne and Leo Walsh were about to plow it under for a luxury condominium development. I took a silent step back from the door, my mind racing the architect in me, kicking into survival mode. Assess the structure, identify the points of failure. The points of failure were in that room drinking my father's expensive scotch. I heard the clink of glass. To progress, Marcus said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and walked away, my heels making no sound on the thick industrial carpet. I didn't go to my office. I went to the one place in the building that still felt like my father, the drafting room. It was a relic, a vast space with towering windows that looked out over the cove. My father refused to modernize it completely. Tables were littered with physical blueprints smelling of vellum and ink. His old oak desk stood in the corner, a monument to a different era. This was his sanctuary. Mine, too, when I was a girl watching him create worlds with a pencil and a dream. I leaned against the cool surface of a drafting table, the renderings for the community center slipping from my numb fingers and scattering on the floor. Tears of rage and grief burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Weak, sentimental. I would not be those things. Not anymore. My father didn't just die of a heart attack. He was being squeezed out, suffocated by the man he trusted most. And they thought I would just crumble. A new cold resolve hardened inside me. I wasn't going to sell. I was going to fight. But I had nothing. No proof. just a conversation I'd overheard. They owned the narrative, the documents, the financials. I was the grieving daughter from out of town, the easy target. I needed evidence. I needed to understand what they had done. My eyes fell on my father's old desk. The center drawer was locked, as it always had been. When I'd found it after the funeral, I'd been too grief-stricken to care about its contents. Now it felt urgent. I knelt down, feeling along the underside of the desk where my father had shown me 30 years ago a small key was taped. A secret for his little girl. My fingers brushed against brittle, aged tape. And there it was, a small tarnished brass key. My hands trembled as I fitted it into the lock. It turned with a soft, satisfying click. I pulled the drawer open. Inside weren't company ledgers or financial reports. There were personal items. A faded photo of my mother who died when I was 10, my own childhood drawings, and a simple black leather-bound journal. I picked it up, the leather soft and worn under my fingertips. I opened it to the first page. My father's bold, familiar handwriting filled the lines. If you're reading this, Alara, then I'm gone. And if I'm gone, things are likely about to get complicated. I've always been better with wood and steel than with words, but for you, I have to try. I need you to know the truth about the company, about Marcus, and about the fire. The fire. The word sent a jolt through me. The old waterfront warehouse fire 15 years ago. It was a town legend, a tragic accident that had almost bankrupted Hayes and Stone before they rebuilt. My father never liked to talk about it. I heard the distinct sound of Marcus's laughter echoing down the hall. They were coming out of the office. I slammed the journal shut, my heart hammering again. I tucked it into the inside pocket of my blazer, the weight of it feeling like a live bomb against my chest. The truth. My father had left me a blueprint to the truth, and as I heard their footsteps approach the drafting room door, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The war for my father's legacy had just begun, and I was no longer the weak, sentimental daughter. I was the one with the blueprint. The drafting room door swung open before I could fully stand. Marcus Thorne filled the doorway, his smile a perfect, practiced mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Ilara, there you are. We were just looking for you." His gaze swept over me, kneeling by the desk and the open, empty drawer. A flicker of something suspicion crossed his face before being smoothed away by that corporate calm. "Everything all right? You look pale." Leo Walsh hovered behind him, a nervous specter in a cheap suit. He couldn't meet my eyes, his gaze darting to the scattered renderings on the floor. We can come back," he mumbled. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I rose to my feet, the weight of the journal a secret anchor in my blazer. I forced a sad smile, channeling the sentimental daughter they expected. I was just going through some of Dad's things. It's harder than I thought. Marcus's expression softened into a facade of understanding. He stepped into the room, placing a patronizing hand on my shoulder. Arthur was a giant. "We all feel the loss, Alara. But the company, life, it has to move forward. We need to talk about the future. The future," I asked, tilting my head, playing my part. "We've had an offer," Leo chimed in, then flinched as Marcus shot him a look. A very generous offer. Marcus continued steering me toward the conference table as if I were a child. Oceanic Crest Developments. They want to buy all Hayes and Stone assets, including the land earmarked for your father's pet project. He said the last two words with a subtle distaste, as if referring to a troublesome puppy. I let my eyes well up, not entirely faked. The community center. But Dad, he wanted that so badly. For the town. The town has changed, Alara. Marcus said, his tone implying I was too naive to understand. Oceanic Crest is offering $20 million. It's a lifeline. The company is over-leveraged. This offer saves us from bankruptcy and sets you up for life. You can go back to New York to your glittering career without this millstone around your neck. Millstone. He called my father's life's work a millstone. The journal seemed to burn against my skin. I looked down, pretending to be overwhelmed. I need some time to process. This is all so much. Of course, Marcus said, his voice oozing false sympathy. Take the weekend. But Alara, the offer is time-sensitive. We need to give them an answer by Monday morning. The board is leaning heavily toward acceptance. The board, which consisted of Marcus Leo and a few other yes-men he'd installed over the years. My father had always been the majority shareholder, but with his passing, the power dynamics had shifted seismically. After they left, their silence felt heavier than their presence. I locked the drafting room door and pulled out the journal. My heart hammered against the leather cover as I opened it again, turning past the first entry. The pages were a mix of business notes, personal musings, and a growing, chilling record of suspicion. I skimmed entries about cash flow problems, unexplained cost overruns on projects Leo managed. Then I found it. The entry dated just over 15 years ago. The fire marshal called it faulty wiring, an accident. But I was in that warehouse the day before. The wiring was new. I installed it myself. Marcus insisted we use a different supplier for the insulation cheaper, he said. I trusted him. Now the waterfront project is ashes and the insurance payout is delayed. Marcus says it's standard procedure, but the whispers have started. Whispers that I cut corners, that my grief over Lena made me careless. Lena, my mother. She had died just 6 months before the fire. The journal revealed a depth of my father's despair. I had never known a man drowning in sorrow and now in suspicion. I turned the page, my breath catching. Leo came to me today, pale as a ghost, said he couldn't live with it anymore. He showed me invoices from the insulation supplier, a shell company, he thinks. The materials were not just cheap, they were highly flammable, substandard, illegal. He said Marcus pressured him to sign off on them, threatened his job, his family, my own partner, my friend. He set the fire. I know it in my soul. Not with a match, perhaps, but with his greed. He created the tinderbox and waited for a spark. The world tilted. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a greedy businessman. He was an arsonist. He had deliberately sabotaged my father's project, risking lives to collect insurance and weaken my father's standing. The fire that almost destroyed us was no accident. It was corporate murder. The entries that followed detailed my father's quiet, desperate investigation. He'd kept Leo close, protecting him, using him to gather evidence against Marcus. But Marcus was careful, too clever to be caught easily. The final relevant entry was dated a week before my father died. I have it. Or almost. Leo finally got me a transaction record, a wire transfer from one of Marcus's hidden accounts to the shell company. It's not enough to take to the police, not yet. The money was for consulting, but the timing is perfect. It's the first thread. I just need to pull it. I'm meeting with a private investigator tomorrow. This ends now. He never made it to that meeting. His heart gave out on a lonely pier. A new terrifying thought erupted in my mind, cold and absolute. What if my father's heart didn't just give out? What if it was helped? I closed the journal, my hands ice cold. I wasn't just fighting for a company. I was unraveling a crime. And the men responsible thought I was a weak, sentimental obstacle to be brushed aside. I needed that wire transfer record. My father would have hidden it. But where he'd written about pulling a thread. My eyes snapped to the old architectural model gathering dust in the corner, a detailed scale model of the original waterfront project, the one that burned. It was his masterpiece built before the fire. He'd never had the heart to dismantle it. I rushed over to it. The model was intricate, showing the warehouse, the piers, the planned park. I ran my fingers over the tiny buildings my architect's mind, seeing the love in every detail. Then I saw it. On the roof of the main warehouse, a tiny, almost invisible loop of blue thread was twisted around a ventilation stack. A literal thread. With trembling fingers, I carefully lifted the roof off the model warehouse. and there tucked inside the hollow structure was a single unlabeled USB drive. I had it, the first real piece of evidence. But as I pocketed the drive, my cell phone rang, an unknown number. I answered, my voice wary. Alara Hayes, a gruff, unfamiliar voice asked, "Yes. Who is this Detective Miller, Cascade Cove PD? I'm sorry to bother you, but we're following up on some irregularities with your father's estate, specifically a $250,000 withdrawal from his personal account the day before he passed. We need to ask you a few questions." The floor dropped out from under me. Marcus wasn't just going to push me out. He was setting me up. The world shrunk to the voice on the phone and the cold, hard weight of the USB drive in my hand. $250,000 gone. The day before he died. My father was a craftsman, not a financier. He believed in tangible assets, bricks, mortar, the sweat equity of a job well done. A withdrawal that size was astronomical, unthinkable. I don't know anything about that. I managed my throat tight. I leaned against the model table for support, the tiny buildings trembling under my weight. "We understand this is a difficult time," Ms. Hayes' Detective Miller's voice was neutral professional, but every word felt like an accusation. "It's a routine inquiry. The bank flagged the transaction due to the amount and the timing. We'd just like to understand the purpose of the withdrawal. Can you come down to the station tomorrow morning?" Say, 9 routine. Nothing about this was routine. This was a calculated move. Marcus was covering his tracks, and he was using my father's memory and now me as the broom. "Of course, Detective," I heard myself say, the good, compliant citizen. "I'll be there." I ended the call and stood in the silent, dusty drafting room, the air thick with ghosts and betrayal. My father's journal felt like a lead weight. He'd written about a thread and I'd pulled it. Now the entire tapestry was unraveling and I was standing in the middle of the snarl. I had to move. They knew about the money. If they were setting me up, the next step would be to plant evidence. A safe deposit key in my purse, a fake invoice in my files. I needed to secure the journal and the USB drive somewhere they would never look. My apartment, no, too obvious. My father's house. The first place they'd search if they got a warrant. My eyes fell on the architectural renderings for the community center still scattered on the floor. My father's dream. The very thing Marcus wanted to destroy. A wild, desperate idea began to form. I gathered the renderings, my movements swift and precise. I slid the journal between 2 large, stiff presentation boards and carefully taped the edges shut, creating a hidden compartment. The USB drive I slipped into the small, zippered pocket of my portfolio bag. Then I walked out of the drafting room, my head held high, the portfolio under my arm like any architect leaving work. I passed Marcus's office. The door was open, and he was on the phone, his back to me. "Assured everything is under control," he was saying. "The sentimentality factor is being mitigated." I didn't break stride. My destination was the build site for the community center on the far edge of the cove. It was a sprawling skeletal frame of steel and concrete, silent and dormant since my father's death. The chain-link fence was locked, but I knew the code, my father's birthday. I slipped inside, the crunch of gravel under my feet, echoing in the twilight. The site was a monument to his vision. Even half-built, you could feel the potential. The soaring spaces for the library, the warm wood outlines of the community hall, the large windows facing the water. It was the antithesis of Marcus's cold glass condos. I went to the site office, a temporary construction trailer. Another code lock. Inside, it smelled of coffee dust and my father's old cologne. His hard hat still hung on a hook. The pain was a physical ache. I didn't have much time. I found what I was looking for in a corner, a heavy-gauge metal lockbox where they kept daily reports and small, expensive tools. I spun the combination my birthday, and it clicked open. Empty. This was it. I placed the portfolio with the hidden journal inside and closed the box. It was a gamble, but a calculated one. Marcus saw this site as a worthless parcel of land, soon to be bulldozed. He would never think to look here. The USB drive, however, I kept on me. I needed to see what was on it. Driving back to my father's house, my house, now the silence was oppressive. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror felt like a threat. The cozy, familiar streets of Cascade Cove now seemed draped in shadows, every friendly face a potential enemy. Inside, I double-locked the door and went straight to my old bedroom, booting up my laptop with trembling fingers. I plugged in the drive. It contained a single PDF file. It was a bank statement from an offshore account I didn't recognize under the name MT Holdings. And there it was, a wire transfer for $50,000, dated just 2 weeks before the warehouse fire, sent to Shield Insulation Consultants. The memo line read Specialty Materials Procurement, Shield. The name was a sick joke. This was the shell company. This was the proof my father died trying to get. But it wasn't enough. As he'd written, it was a thread. The transfer was for consulting. A good lawyer could argue it was for a legitimate, if unfortunate, business relationship. I needed more. I needed to connect Marcus directly to the fire and now to my father's death. The doorbell rang, shattering the silence. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. I yanked the USB drive out and shoved it into the pocket of my jeans. Peering through the front window, I saw a figure standing on the porch. Leo Walsh. What was he doing here? Was he here to threaten me, to warn me? Or was he part of the setup I considered not answering, but curiosity and a desperate need for any ally overruled caution? I opened the door a crack, the chain still on. Leo. He looked terrible. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He was wringing his hands. Elara. I'm sorry to bother you at home. Can I come in? Please, it's important. His desperation seemed genuine, or he was a very good actor. I made a decision. I unlatched the chain and let him in. He didn't sit, just paced the small foyer. I heard he blurted out about the police. Marcus. He told me. He said it was a shame that you must have been in some kind of financial trouble in New York, that you pressured your dad for the money. The audacity of it took my breath away. You know that's a lie, Leo. I know, he whispered fiercely, his eyes darting toward the window as if expecting Marcus to be listening outside. I know Elara, but he has documents, forged emails between you and your father. He's been planning this for a while. He wants you out of the way, permanently. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice cold. You're in this with him. The invoices, the fire. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I was scared. He threatened my family, my wife. She was sick, the medical bills. He offered me a way out. I never thought it would go this far. I never thought Arthur... His voice broke. Your father was a good man. He protected me even when he knew what I'd done. After he died, I thought I could live with it. But this framing you, I can't. This was my chance, my only chance. Then help me, Leo, I said, stepping closer. Give me something I can use, something real. He shook his head, a frantic, fearful motion. I can't. He'll destroy me. He's going to destroy you anyway. When this falls apart, you'll be the fall guy. Don't you see that he stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping in defeat? There's a boat, he said so quietly I almost missed it. The Aphrodite. It's docked at the private marina slip B12. It's not in his name, but it's his. He has a safe on board. He brags about it when he's drunk. He keeps everything there. The real records, the originals. My mind raced. A boat, it made sense. Isolated, mobile, private. Why are you telling me this? I repeated. He finally met my gaze, his eyes filled with a hopeless shame. Because your father once told me that the foundation of a building is the most important part. If it's built on lies, the whole thing will eventually crumble. And I'm tired of living in a house that's about to fall down. He turned and left, disappearing into the night as quickly as he'd come. I stood alone in the quiet house, the address B12 burning in my mind. I had a direction. I had a target. But I also had an appointment with the police in the morning and a partner who was setting me up for embezzlement and God knows what else. The foundation of my life had been built on my father's honesty. Now I had to navigate a world constructed entirely of lies, and the only way out was to break into a mobster's boat. The night was endless. Every creak of the old house was a footstep, every passing car headlight a police cruiser coming for me. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, my father's journal open on my lap, rereading his words until they were seared into my brain. I need you to know the truth. By the time the gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, a cold, sharp clarity had settled over me. Grief was a luxury I could no longer afford. Sentimentality was a weapon they used against me. Today I would stop being Alara, the grieving daughter. I would become Hayes, the architect of their ruin. I dressed with purpose, a dark tailored pantsuit, my hair pulled back in a severe knot. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger one with my father's determined eyes. The Cascade Cove Police Department was a small brick building that had always seemed friendly and safe. Today, it felt like a fortress. Detective Miller was a wiry man in his 50s with a tired face and eyes that missed nothing. He led me to a sparse beige interview room that smelled of stale coffee and antiseptic. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Hayes," he said, gesturing to a hard plastic chair. He sat opposite me, a thin file folder between us. "This won't take long. Can you account for your father's withdrawal of $250,000 on the 12th of last month?" I folded my hands on the table to keep them from shaking. "No, I cannot." My father didn't discuss his personal finances with me, but I can tell you that the idea he was giving me that money or that I was pressuring him for it is absurd. I have my own successful practice in New York. My financial records are an open book. I was counting on Marcus's forgeries being flimsy first-pass attempts to scare me into compliance. Miller nodded noncommittal. "And your relationship with your father? It was my understanding you were distant." A clever question, designed to paint a picture of a resentful, opportunistic child. We were close in the ways that mattered. I said my voice even. We respected each other's careers. I loved him deeply. Distance doesn't change that. He made a note. Did he seem worried or preoccupied in the days before his death? Did he mention any concerns about the business, about his partners? The question was a landmine. I could point him toward Marcus, but without proof, I'd look like I was deflecting. I was the outsider, the one with motive. Marcus was the pillar of the community. "My father was always preoccupied with his work," I said carefully. "He was passionate about the community center project. He believed in it. I know some of his partners felt it was a financial drain." I let the implication hang in the air. Detective Miller's eyes flickered up from his notes, meeting mine. He held my gaze for a beat too long. He knew. He might not have had proof, but he knew there was more to this story. "That's all for now, Ms. Hayes," he said finally, closing the folder. "We may have more questions as the investigation progresses." I stood my legs weak with relief. "Of course, Detective. I want to find out what happened to that money as much as you do." I walked out of the police station into the weak morning sun, feeling his eyes on my back every step of the way. I had bought myself a little time, but the clock was ticking faster than ever. The private marina was on the north end of the cove, a world away from the working fishing docks. It was a forest of gleaming white masts and polished teak, smelling of salt money and exclusivity. The Aphrodite was easy to find in slip B12. She was a 40-foot power yacht, sleek and ostentatious, a floating testament to Marcus's taste. It was just past noon and the marina was quiet. I'd changed into dark jeans, a black sweater, and a baseball cap, pulling my hair through the back. I felt like a caricature of a spy, but anonymity was my only ally. The gate to the dock was locked with a keypad. I held my breath and typed in the code Leo had whispered to me just before he left my house, 12:15, my father's birthday. The lock buzzed and clicked open. Leo was still playing both sides, but his self-preservation instinct was stronger than his loyalty to Marcus. The Aphrodite bobbed gently in the water. The door to the main cabin was locked, but a quick, desperate search under the mat and in a nearby coiled rope revealed a hide-a-key. Marcus was arrogant, but not clever. Inside the cabin was opulent and sterile white leather chrome fittings, a fully stocked bar. It didn't smell like the sea, it smelled like a new car. I ignored the lavish decor and began my search. I started with the obvious places, desk drawers, cabinets. Nothing. Then I remembered what Leo said a safe. It had to be hidden. I ran my hands along the paneling in the master berth, looking for seams. Behind a false panel in the closet, I found it. A small digital safe. My heart sank. I had the boat, but I didn't have the combination. Leo hadn't known it. I leaned my forehead against the cold metal, frustration welling up. I was so close. Think Alara, think like your father. What would Marcus use something he could remember easily? Something he thought was clever. Not his birthday. Maybe the date of the fire. The day he thought he'd won, I punched in the numbers. 091505. September 15, 2005, the date of the waterfront fire. A red light. Incorrect. My palms were sweating. What else? The date he became a partner. The amount of the insurance payout. Then it hit me. The ultimate arrogance. The date he finally gained full, unchallenged control of Hayes and Stone. The date of my father's death. I entered the numbers with trembling fingers. 071023. July 10, 2023. A green light. A soft, satisfying click. The safe door swung open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. There were files. I pulled them out, my hands shaking. The top one was labeled Oceanic Crest. I flipped it open. It was the full buyout agreement, but with addendums I'd never seen. It detailed a 7-figure consulting bonus for Marcus Thorne payable upon successful transfer of assets, a blatant kickback. Beneath it was another file, Pyre Shield. My breath caught. This was the mother lode. Invoices, transfer records, and my God-printed emails between Marcus and the shell company's front man, discussing the special flammability requirements for the insulation. It was premeditated arson in black and white. But at the very bottom of the safe, tucked away in a separate sealed envelope, was the thing that turned my blood to ice. It was a medical report. My father's medical report from his annual physical just 2 months before he died. I scanned the dense medical language, my heart hammering. Patient is in excellent health for his age. Cardiovascular system, strong cholesterol levels, optimal. No sign of arterial blockage. Stress test results well above average. The doctor had scrawled a note at the bottom. Arthur, you're the healthiest 60-year-old I know. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. My father's heart wasn't weak. It was strong. He wasn't a man on the verge of a heart attack. He was a man in peak condition. The final piece of paper in the envelope was a receipt from a private cash-only pharmacy in Seattle, dated the day before my father died. The item purchased was listed as industrial-grade solvent cleaner, but someone had handwritten a chemical name in the margin, Digitalis purpurea. I didn't need to be a doctor to know what that was. Foxglove, a plant, a deadly undetectable in standard autopsies poison that causes fatal cardiac arrest. I stumbled back, dropping the papers as if they were on fire. I gripped the edge of the desk, my vision swimming. It wasn't a heart attack. It was murder. Cold, calculated, pharmaceutical murder. The sound of a car door slamming outside jolted me back to the present. Then another. Voices. Laughter. Marcus's voice, loud and jovial. Wait until you see her, gentlemen. She's a real beauty. They were here. Marcus was bringing the Oceanic Crest executives for a celebratory drink on the boat, and I was trapped inside. The sound of their footsteps on the dock plank was like gunshots. Marcus's voice boomed closer now. Right this way, gentlemen. The bar is fully stocked. We have much to celebrate. Panic is a cold flame. It burns away everything thought, fear, hesitation, leaving only pure survivalist instinct. I scooped the damning files from the safe, my movements frantic but silent. The Oceanic Crest Agreement, the Pyre Shield emails, the medical report, the pharmacy receipt. I didn't have time to read them, only to act. The main cabin had no rear exit. The only windows were small sealed portholes. I was in a polished white leather trap. The footsteps reached the deck outside. A key jingled in the cabin door lock. I dropped to the floor and rolled under the built-in dinette table, yanking the long white tablecloth down to hide me just as the cabin door swung open. I curled into a tight ball, the stolen files pressed against my chest, praying the cloth didn't move. The overhead lights flicked on, flooding the cabin with a harsh, accusatory glow. "See nothing but the best," Marcus announced, his voice filling the small space. I could see his polished loafers and the legs of two other men in expensive suits as they moved past my hiding spot toward the bar. "Impressive, Thorne," one of the men said, his voice a low, smooth rumble. "A fitting vessel for a man of your accomplishments." "This is just the beginning," David Marcus replied. I heard the clink of glasses, the glug of expensive liquor. "Once the Hayes parcel is ours, the entire cove opens up. We'll rename it Oceanic Crest Estates. Has a nice ring, doesn't it?" My blood boiled, renaming my father's legacy, his town. The daughter remains the only complication, the other man, David, asked. Marcus let out a dismissive chuckle. "Alara. She's being handled. The police are already questioning her about some financial discrepancies. She'll be so busy defending herself she won't have the energy or the credibility to fight the sale. By Monday, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her just to make it all go away. And if she doesn't," David pressed his tone, implying he preferred more permanent solutions, "then alternative arrangements will be made." Marcus said, his voice dropping to a sinister calm. "The pier where her father had his accident is a dangerous place at night." The air froze in my lungs. It wasn't just a threat, it was a confession. He was admitting to my father's murder in front of witnesses, so confident was he in his power and their complicity. I needed to get out now. Every second under this table increased the risk of discovery 100-fold. Then I remembered the head, the bathroom. I'd seen a small rectangular window in there, an opening for a ventilation fan maybe. It was my only chance. I waited for a moment of distraction, one of the men telling a loud laughing story about a golf game. As their laughter peaked, I slowly, silently crawled out from under the table and slithered on my belly into the narrow hallway that led to the head and the berths. I slipped inside the head and locked the flimsy door behind me. The window was, as I'd hoped, a small hatch for a fan unit. It was only about 10 inches square, but it was my escape route. I worked my fingers around the edges, finding the plastic clips that held the fan in place. I pried them back, my nails cracking with the effort. The fan unit came free with a soft pop. I set it silently on the floor. Now the open hole. Could I fit? I'm slim, but shoulders are shoulders. It would be tight, agonizingly tight. I heard a knock on the head door. Occupied, one of the Oceanic Crest men called out, his voice slurred with drink. "Use the one in the master berth?" James Marcus replied, his voice suddenly closer. He was right outside the door. I had no time. I shoved the folded files through the hole, hearing them land with a soft thud on the deck outside. Then I pushed my head and one arm through, wriggling like a fish. My shoulders caught. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain of the fiberglass frame scraping my skin. My sweater ripped. I was stuck. "The light's on in here." Marcus said, his voice now directly on the other side of the door. He jiggled the handle. Locked. "Who's in there?" I gave one final desperate heave, fueled by pure terror. My body scraped through the opening and I tumbled out onto the cool, wet deck, landing in a heap. I didn't pause. I scooped up the files, scrambled to my feet, and ran crouched low toward the stern. I heard the head door open behind me. "What the hell?" Marcus roared. "The window." There was no time for stealth now. I reached the stern rail. The dark, cold water of the cove looked back at me 10 feet below. It was my only way out without going past them on the dock. I didn't hesitate. I clutched the files to my chest, climbed over the rail, and jumped. The shock of the water was breathtaking. It was icy, swallowing me whole, soaking through my clothes, pulling me down. I kicked hard, fighting my way back to the surface, gasping for air. I could hear shouting from the boat. She went in the water. Find her, I struck out for the nearest shore, which wasn't the main dock but a rocky, wooded outcrop about 50 yards away. I swam with a frantic, clumsy stroke, the waterlogged files a dragging weight in my arms. My clothes felt like lead. Adrenaline was the only thing keeping me moving. Spotlights from the Aphrodite swept across the water beams of light, cutting through the darkness searching for me. I dove under just as one passed over my head, holding my breath until my lungs burned. I finally reached the rocks, hauling myself out of the water, shivering uncontrollably. I was cut, bruised, and freezing, but I was alive, and I had the evidence. From my hiding place in the trees, I watched the commotion on the dock. Marcus and the two executives were arguing, their gestures sharp and angry. The spotlight continued to sweep the water. They knew I had escaped. They knew I had heard them, and they knew I had taken something from the safe. The game had changed. It was no longer a corporate takeover. It was a manhunt. I waited until their attention was focused on the far side of the cove. Then I moved, keeping to the shadows, a dripping, shivering specter, moving through the night. I had to get to my car, which was parked a quarter-mile away at the marina entrance. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every sound was a pursuer, but I made it. I slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors, my entire body shaking from cold and delayed shock. I looked at the passenger seat. The files were a sodden, pulpy mess. The ink on the receipts and reports had begun to run, blurring the words. The evidence was literally dissolving in my hands. I had proof of murder, but it was evidence obtained illegally, and now it was water damaged. It was useless in a court of law. But I had something else. I had heard Marcus's confession with my own ears. I had seen the panic in his eyes, and I knew with a chilling certainty that he would not let me live to tell the tale. I started the car and pulled away, my head on a swivel. I couldn't go home. That was the first place they would look. I couldn't go to the police without solid, admissible evidence. I was alone, wet-hunted, and holding a pile of disintegrating paper that was both my salvation and my death sentence. I had one place left, one person who might be willing to help. I drove toward the one sanctuary I had left, the half-built community center. I needed to retrieve my father's journal, and I needed to find a way to use the truth before the lies buried me for good. The community center site was a cathedral of shadows in the moonless night. The skeletal steel beams clawed at a sky devoid of stars, and the silence was broken only by the whisper of the wind through rebar and the distant ominous crash of waves against the pier where my father was murdered. I parked my car a mile away in the lot of a closed grocery store and approached on foot through the dense woods that bordered the property. Every snap of a twig under my feet made me flinch. I was a cornered animal, soaked, shivering, and clutching a bundle of pulp that was supposed to be my salvation. The code on the gate still worked. I slipped inside, the chain link rattling softly behind me, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. I moved like a ghost through the concrete shells of future rooms, my wet clothes clinging to me, the cold seeping into my bones. The construction trailer was exactly as I'd left it. I opened the lockbox with trembling, numb fingers. The portfolio was still there, dry and safe. I tore open the tape seam and pulled out my father's journal. Holding it in my hands, feeling the dry, firm leather was like grabbing a lifeline. This at least was intact. This was the heart of the truth, even if the peripheral evidence was washing away. I spread the waterlogged files from the boat on the dusty floor of the trailer. It was a disaster. The Oceanic Crest Agreement was a blur of blue ink. The Pyre Shield emails were mostly illegible. The medical report was salvageable, the typed text still readable, but the handwritten pharmacy receipt was a smear of black, the chemical name now an unprovable blob. I had the journal and a doctor's note saying my father was healthy. It was something, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. A soft knock on the trailer door nearly stopped my heart. I froze my breath, catching in my throat. I hadn't heard anyone approach. I looked around wildly for a weapon, my hand closing around a heavy metal ruler. "Ilara," a voice whispered. "It's Leo. Are you in there, Leo? The traitor. The coward." Had he led them here? Was this the trap? "Go away," I hissed through the door. "Please," his voice was desperate, pleading. "I saw what happened at the marina. I've been looking for you everywhere. I know you don't trust me, but you have to listen. They're coming for you." "You set me up," I snarled, keeping the door locked. "You gave me the code and then sent Marcus right to me." "I didn't. I swear he must have seen you on the marina cameras. He has them wired to his phone. I didn't know Ilara. When I heard he was there, I panicked. I came to warn you." His story had the ring of truth. Marcus's arrogance would absolutely extend to a remote surveillance system, and Leo's fear was too palpable, too raw to be entirely feigned. "Why should I believe you because I brought you this?" he said. I heard a soft rustle, and a single sheet of paper was slid under the door. I picked it up. It was a printout of an email. The header was from Marcus Thorne to David Crest of Oceanic Crest Developments. The timestamp was from today. David. "The situation with the Hayes girl is contained. She has nothing admissible. However, her continued existence is a narrative problem. The police inquiry is a short-term solution. I am authorizing the permanent solution we discussed. The inheritance clause is clear. With no heirs, the estate defaults to the controlling partner. Make the necessary arrangements. The pier at midnight would be poetic, don't you think?" The word permanent seemed to pulse on the page. This wasn't a corporate takeover anymore. It was a death warrant. My death warrant. My legs gave way and I slumped against the wall, the metal ruler clattering to the floor. The sound seemed to decide something for Leo. "Ilara, please," he begged. "Let me in. We don't have much time." With a shaking hand, I unlocked the door. Leo slipped inside, looking even more terrified than I felt. His eyes widened at the sight of me, soaked, shivering, surrounded by ruined paper. "My God," he breathed. "They're going to kill me, Leo," I said, my voice flat, all emotion burned away by sheer exhaustion and terror. "They're going to throw me off the same pier." "I know," he whispered, his face ashen. "I've been a coward. I let him use me for years. I let him destroy your father, and I stood by and did nothing. I can't let him kill you, too." He knelt down, looking at the ruined files. "The water damage. It's bad. But it's not hopeless." He pointed a trembling finger at the smeared receipt. "This is gone, but the medical report is still legible. And the journal." He looked at the leather-bound book in my lap with something like reverence. "That's the key. Arthur's own words. It's not enough for the police." I said, the hopelessness a heavy weight on my chest. It's my word against his. A grieving daughter's diary against a pillar of the community. "Then we don't go to the police," Leo said, a strange new determination in his eyes. "Not yet. What are you talking about?" "The board meeting, Monday morning. Marcus is going to force the vote on the Oceanic Crest sale. He'll have the majority. He'll win." "So what does that change?" Leo looked at me, a frantic energy replacing his fear. "Because he's going to do it live. What he's arrogant, Ilara. He wants a spectacle. He's invited the local press, the Business Journal. He's going to announce the sale and the new condominium project as his triumphant legacy, erasing your father's name in front of the whole town. He's turning the boardroom into a stage. The pieces clicked into place in my mind, a terrible, beautiful, and terrifying strategy. So we give the audience a different show. I finish the architect in me, seeing the new blueprint forming. We confront him there, in front of everyone, with the journal, with the medical report, with you. Leo paled the cowardice returning in a wave. Me, I can't. He'll destroy me? He's already destroying you, I shot back, grabbing his arm. He's gonna kill me, Leo, and when he's done, what use will he have for you? You're a loose end. You always have been. The truth of it settled over him. He was trapped between a murderer and his own conscience, and there was only one way out. We use his own stage. I pressed my voice low and intense. We broadcast the truth. There's no judge, no rules of evidence, just the court of public opinion. We show them what he is. We show them who my father really was. Leo was silent for a long moment, his internal war visible on his face. Finally, he nodded a slow, grim movement. Okay, he whispered. Okay. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black digital voice recorder. I've been collecting insurance. He said, a flush of shame on his cheeks. For years, conversations, instructions. It's not much, but it's something. I was always too scared to use it. He handed it to me. It was another thread. A thin, fragile one, but it was something. We had a plan. A desperate, dangerous, and arguably insane plan. We would walk into the lion's den and accuse the lion of murder in front of his adoring crowd. But first, I had to survive the night. Marcus knew I was out here wounded and alone. He wouldn't wait for Monday. You can't stay here, Leo said, echoing my thoughts. It's the second place he'll look after your house. Where then? He thought for a moment. The old lighthouse. The one on the point. It's decommissioned, boarded up. No one goes there. I have the key. The Historical Society asked Hayes and Stone to assess it for restoration last year. It's cold, but it's safe. It was a risk. Trusting Leo was a risk. But I was out of options. I gathered the journal, the legible medical report, the voice recorder, and the smeared but still symbolic files. We slipped out of the trailer and melted back into the woods, two shadows fleeing from a predator. As we reached the edge of the trees, the beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness from the direction of the main gate. A deep voice called out, "Ms. Hayes, this is Detective Miller. We need to speak with you." Leo and I froze, pressed against the rough bark of a pine tree. He'd found me. Or had Marcus sent him a Lara Hayes Miller called again, his flashlight sweeping the site. "I'm not here to arrest you. I just want to talk." His words were reasonable, but in the darkness, after everything I'd learned, they felt like a lure, a trick. If I stepped into that light, would I be walking into protection or into custody, delivered right into Marcus's waiting hands? I looked at Leo, his eyes wide with fresh panic. I looked down at the evidence in my arms, my only hope for justice. I made a choice. I turned away from the light and followed Leo deeper into the shadows. We moved through the woods like ghosts, Leo's labored breathing and the crunch of our footsteps the only sounds. Every few seconds, I glanced back, expecting to see the beam of Detective Miller's flashlight cutting through the trees. Had he been there to help me? Or had Marcus's reach extended even to the police? I couldn't take the chance. The old lighthouse stood on a windswept point of land, a lonely sentinel against the roaring Pacific. Its white paint was peeling and the windows were boarded up, but the structure stood firm, a testament to an era of simpler craftsmanship. Leo fumbled with a heavy key ring, finally unlocking a side door that groaned in protest. Inside, it was a tomb, cold, damp, and filled with the smell of salt and decay. A spiral staircase wound up into the darkness. We didn't go up. We barricaded ourselves in the ground floor maintenance room, shoving a heavy metal cabinet against the door. I collapsed in a corner, my body finally giving out. The shivering was uncontrollable. Leo found a dusty, moth-eaten emergency blanket in a cabinet and wrapped it around my shoulders. "We can't stay long." He whispered, his eyes glued to the door. "Just until dawn. Then we move." He was right. This was a temporary refuge, but as the adrenaline faded, the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. I was a fugitive accused of a crime I didn't commit, hunted by a murderer, and my only ally was a man who had helped destroy my father. I pulled out my father's journal using the light of my nearly dead phone to read. I needed his strength. I turned to a random page, my eyes falling on an entry from a year ago. Ilara sent pictures of her new skyscraper in Dubai. So proud of her. She sees the world in angles and steel building towers that touch the clouds. I see it in the grain of wood and the handshake of a neighbor building communities that touch the heart. We are architects of different cathedrals, my daughter and I. But the foundation is the same. Integrity. Truth. I hope she never has to learn how rare those things truly are. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sharp. He was so proud of the life I'd built, a life I'd considered so separate from his. But he saw the connection I'd been blind to. We both built things meant to last. And now his cathedral was under siege, and mine felt 1,000,000 miles away. He knew, Leo said softly, watching me. He knew what Marcus was long before the end. He kept me close, not because he trusted me, but because he was protecting me. He said, even the weakest stone has a place in the foundation if you set it right. He was a better man than either of us deserved, I said, my voice thick. Leo hung his head. I know. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside. I checked the voice recorder Leo had given me. The battery was low, but there were several files. I played one, keeping the volume barely audible. Marcus's voice. The insurance adjuster is asking too many questions. Make the problem go away, Leo. That's what I pay you for. Leo's voice timid. How, Marcus? I'm an accountant, not a... Marcus's voice cold. Be creative. A donation to his kid's college fund. A vacation. I don't care. Just shut him up. It was small, circumstantial, but it was a voice. A piece of the pattern. My phone, which had been flickering, finally died. We were plunged into utter darkness. The kind of darkness Zion had described from the casket. Total, absolute, and suffocating. I felt a wave of panic, my breath catching. I was trapped, buried alive in this stone tomb. Ilara, Leo's voice, was nervous in the blackness. I'm okay, I lied, my heart pounding. I focused on the sound of the waves on the rough blanket against my skin, on the solid weight of the journal in my lap. I was not in a coffin. I was in a fortress, and at dawn I was going to war. Sleep was impossible. The night stretched on an eternity of cold and fear. Just as the first faint hint of gray began to filter through the cracks in the boards, we heard it. A car engine slowly approaching. Then another. Leo scrambled to a peephole in the boards. Oh God, he breathed. It's them. I joined him. 2 black SUVs were parked at the base of the path leading to the lighthouse. 4 men got out. They weren't police. They were big, dressed in dark clothing, moving with a purposeful, brutal efficiency. Marcus's arrangements. The permanent solution. I whispered, my blood running cold. The back door, Leo said, grabbing my arm. There's a path down to the water. It's a cliff, but there are climbing ropes the surveyors left. We moved as quietly as we could, shoving the cabinet away from the door. The men were at the front now, pounding on it, the sound echoing through the hollow tower. We slipped out the back and into the damp pre-dawn mist. The path was steep and slippery with seaweed. Below, the ocean crashed against jagged rocks. Tied to an iron ring was a knotted rope leading down to a narrow ledge. Go, Leo urged. I went first, climbing down the wet rope, my hands burning. The files and journal were shoved inside my sweater. I reached the ledge, a mere sliver of rock just above the churning water. Leo was halfway down when we heard shouts from above. They'd found our escape route. A man appeared at the top, silhouetted against the gray sky. He started climbing down after us. He was fast, much faster than we were. We were trapped. The ledge ended in a sheer drop into the violent surf. There was nowhere to go. Leo looked at me, his face a mask of resignation and sudden, unexpected courage. The journal, he said. Get the journal to the meeting. What are you doing? Being a better stone, he said. And before I could stop him, he turned and started climbing back, up the rope directly toward the descending enforcer. Leo, no. The two men met on the rope. There was a struggle, a grunt of pain, and then Leo, with a desperate yell, wrapped his arms and legs around the man and shoved off from the cliff face. They fell together, a tangle of limbs, into the roaring ocean below. The impact was sickening. They disappeared beneath the waves. "Leo," I screamed, but the wind stole my voice. I clung to the cliff, stunned and horrified. He had sacrificed himself. For me, for my father, for a chance at redemption he would never see. The other men were shouting from above, but they couldn't see me on the ledge from their angle. I was hidden for now. I looked down at the churning water. There was no sign of Leo or the enforcer. My eyes stung with tears that mixed with the sea spray. I had to move. His sacrifice couldn't be in vain. I looked along the ledge. It was narrower than I'd thought, but it did not quite end. It curved around the base of the cliff, becoming a treacherous, slim path that led toward a rocky beach a few hundred yards away. It was my only chance. Pressing myself against the cold, wet stone, I began to shuffle sideways, my heart in my throat. One wrong step, one loose rock, and I would join Leo in the depths. The journey felt like hours. The sun began to rise, casting a weak, pink light over the deadly, beautiful coast. By the time I stumbled onto the pebbled beach, my legs were jelly, and my entire body was shaking with exhaustion and grief. I was alive. I had the journal. I had the medical report. I had the voice recorder, and I had a board meeting to crash. I looked at my watch. It was 8:17 a.m. The meeting started at 9:00. I had 43 minutes to get across town, to walk into the lion's den, and to bring down a killer, alone. I started running. The streets of Cascade Cove blurred past me. I ran not with the graceful stride of an athlete, but with the desperate, stumbling gait of a survivor. My clothes were still damp, my hair a wild tangle, my face streaked with salt and tears. People on the sidewalk stared, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the weight of the journal in my hand and the fire in my heart. I reached the Hayes and Stone headquarters at 8:58. Through the glass front doors, I could see the lobby was filled with reporters, their cameras held at the ready. Marcus's spectacle was underway. I didn't go through the front. I slipped around the back to the loading dock using a key code my father had given me years ago, the code for the emergency exit. It still worked. I pushed the door open and stepped into the sterile concrete hallway that led to the service elevator. My reflection in the elevator's polished metal doors was a shock. I looked like a wild woman, a shipwreck victim. But my eyes were my father's, hard, determined, and clear. The sentimental daughter was gone. Only Hayes remained. The elevator opened directly into a small antechamber behind the main boardroom. I could hear Marcus's voice amplified and booming through the wall. And so, with a heavy heart, but a clear vision for the future, "We must lay the past to rest," he was saying, his tone dripping with false solemnity. "The Hayes and Stone name has been a proud one, but progress demands sacrifice. Today we embrace a new beginning with Oceanic Crest Developments." A smattering of applause came from the room. My hand went to the door handle. This was it, my stage, my father's stage. I took a deep breath, remembering Leo's final, desperate act of courage. I would not let it be in vain. I threw the door open. The boardroom was packed. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the directors, their faces a mix of avarice and indifference. Along the walls, reporters and cameras were clustered, and at the head of the table, standing before a large screen displaying the Oceanic Crest logo, was Marcus Thorne, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. That smile vanished when he saw me. A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Cameras swung toward me, flashbulbs popping. Alara Marcus said, his voice losing its smooth cadence, "What is the meaning of this? You're disrupting a private board meeting. This company was built by my father's hands." I said, my voice cutting through the murmur, strong and clear, despite my disheveled state. I walked into the center of the room, my eyes locked on him. His blood is in its foundations. And this meeting is anything but private. Security. Marcus barked. Let her speak, Marcus. The voice was quiet, but it carried. It was Old Man Henderson, the board's eldest member and my father's first investor. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and curious. I nodded my thanks to him and turned to face the room. Marcus Thorne is about to sell you a future built on a lie I began. A lie that started 15 years ago with a fire he set to collect insurance and seize control. This is slanderous nonsense. Marcus roared, his face turning purple. I held up my father's journal. This is my father's journal. He knew you were sabotaging him, Marcus. He knew you used substandard flammable materials in the waterfront warehouse. He knew you bribed officials to call it an accident. I opened it to the relevant page and read my father's words aloud, his voice speaking through me from beyond the grave, detailing his suspicion, his pain, his discovery of the truth. The room was utterly silent now, hanging on every word. And when he got too close to the truth, I continued, my voice dropping, becoming deadly calm. You killed him. The room erupted. Shouts of "what an impossible" filled the air. Marcus looked like a cornered animal. She's insane. Grief has twisted her mind. I held up the medical report. This is my father's final physical. His doctor called him the healthiest 60-year-old I know. His heart was strong. I then held up the smeared but still recognizable pharmacy receipt. And this is a receipt from a cash-only pharmacy in Seattle. The day before my father died, you purchased Digitalis purpurea, foxglove, a poison that induces fatal cardiac arrest. The color drained from Marcus's face. He hadn't known I had this. That proves nothing. It's water damaged. It's a forgery, is it? I asked softly. I then pulled out the final piece, Leo's digital recorder. I held it up for everyone to see. Your own accountant, Leo Walsh, has been gathering evidence against you for years. He gave this to me last night before your men chased him to his death at the lighthouse. A fresh wave of shock rolled through the room. I pressed play. The room listened rapt as Marcus's voice, clear and cold, filled the silence. The pier where her father had his accident is a dangerous place at night. Then the email Leo had slid under the door. I read it aloud, my voice shaking with fury. I am authorizing the permanent solution. The pier at midnight would be poetic, don't you think? I looked at Marcus, whose arrogance had finally crumbled into sheer, undiluted terror. You didn't just want his company, Marcus. You wanted his legacy. You wanted to erase him, but you failed. It was then that the boardroom door opened again. Detective Miller stood there, his face grim, 2 uniformed officers flanking him. His eyes found mine, and he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He had heard everything. Marcus Thorne Miller said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence, "You are under arrest for the murder of Arthur Hayes and the attempted murder of Alara Hayes. You have the right to remain silent." As the officers moved forward, clamping handcuffs on a sputtering, defeated Marcus, the room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, board members yelled at each other, and cameras flashed like lightning. I stood in the eye of the storm, watching as the man who destroyed my family was led away. There was no triumph in me, only a profound, aching exhaustion, and grief for my father and for Leo, the weak stone, who had ultimately held fast. In the days that followed, the fallout was immense. The Oceanic Crest deal was voided. Marcus faced a mountain of charges from arson to murder. The story dominated the news, a tragic tale of greed and betrayal in a small coastal town. I stood once more at the site of the community center, the wind whipping my hair. The project was mine now, to finish or to abandon. In my hand, I held the final page from my father's journal, an entry I hadn't read until that morning. The community center is more than a building. It is a promise that even after I'm gone, the heart of this town will keep beating. that people will have a place to gather, to dream, to belong. Alara, if you're reading this, you are the keeper of that promise now. Build it not for me, but for them, and for yourself. I looked out at the skeletal frame, seeing not a half-finished structure, but the blueprint for a future. My father's cathedral, and now mine. I wasn't the same woman who had returned to Cascade Cove. The sleek New York architect was gone, her clean lines and professional detachment burned away in the fire of truth. I was something new, something stronger. A woman who understood that the most important structures aren't made of steel and glass, but of memory, integrity, and love. I picked up a hard hat from the site office, my father's hard hat. I placed it on my head. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the wind. "Let's get to work." The foundation had been tested, and it had held. Now it was time to build.